Okay, welcome everyone. We are going to start the digestive webinar tonight, and I want to thank you for being here. We're going to talk about how does your digestive system, first of all, work, and second of all, we're going to talk about how it malfunctions. So, first thing I have to tell you is this webinar is intended for educational purposes only. It's not to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any diseases. So one of the things I recommend is that you take notes. Uh, if you have questions, what you can do is just go to getperfecthealth@gmail.com, and you can send us any of your questions that you'd like to while you're that come up during the webinar. And also you can call that number 763-300-3456. So let's get started. I'm Dr. Mark Steenerson, and I have been working for over 39 years in the wellness field. Our purpose is always to look to find out what is the root cause of your body malfunctioning rather than just treating the symptoms. And that's what we find really as long-term benefits as far as somebody getting healthy. And it also teaches people how to be able to take care of themselves and be responsible for their own health. Another thing I want to mention is that at the end, if you stay at the end, we're going to have a free gift that I want to give you. So be sure to hang in there for the half hour that we're going to be working on this. And let's get started with digestion. So where does digestion start? Starts in the mouth. Chewing our food, the first thing it does is we have enzymes that are secreted called amylase. And amylase are great for breaking down carbohydrates and starches. So just remember, the mouth is where digestion begins, breaking down starches. Also in our mouth, we need to chew our food. That's why we have teeth. The more we chew our food up and grind it up, the less energy it takes to digest our food. Very, very important for us. And the second rule of the stomach, besides chewing your food at least 20 times, is to have at least no more than 4 ounces of any type of fluid with your meal. So why is that? We're going to talk about that in a second. Why is it important to not overdrink too much water or other types of fluids? So let's go in and talk about the stomach now. As the food is chewed, it comes down the esophagus and it goes into the stomach. Now, the stomach is very interesting because its job is to break down protein. Remember, the mouth is breaking down starches, carbohydrates. Now we're going to break down protein. In order to do that, we have to have high levels of what we call hydrochloric acid. The cells in the stomach create this acid, and that acid has a pH of about 1.5. So the pH goes from 0 to 14. Water would be 7.0 or neutral. So we need that heavy acid in there to be able to go in and break down the protein. So if we go in and drink, say, lots of water and the water is 7.0, we put that together, it dilutes the acid in our stomach. And so we can't break down proteins very well. The other thing that we need to do is we need to have pepsin. Pepsin is an enzyme that's secreted in the stomach here. So between the acid and the enzyme, it breaks our food down from solid into a liquid called chyme. Very, very important. If we don't have enough stomach acid, which a lot of people nowadays don't, and I'll explain why in a minute, then we build up gas and bloating in the stomach after we eat. The gas builds up, and what happens, it weakens the valve. There's a valve here that causes the food to not go back up in the esophagus. The one thing about the stomach is the stomach has a protective mucus layer. And this mucus layer does not allow the acid to eat holes through it. It protects the stomach. So very important, whereas the esophagus doesn't have that. So if that valve weakens and we get a bunch of gas and bloating and it builds up what we call lactic acid, it will put pressure and break through and shoot up through here in the esophagus. And we all know what that is. That's heartburn. Another name is called acid reflux, or the technical term is GERD, gastroesophageal reflux disease. So when that comes up, that can burn a hole and damage the esophagus if that keeps happening again and again. We call it Barrett's esophagus, or it can lead to esophageal cancer. So very important that we have the proper acid in here. Now, one of the other things that this acid does is when we get different types of fungus, bacteria, yeast, viruses, and parasites in our food, and there's a lot of them that are in it when they come down, it gets into this acid bath, and the acid bath kills it off. So it's our first line of defense against these microbes, these bad bugs. Now, a lot of people, when they get heartburn, it starts to create all kinds of problems in here. And so what's the first thing they look for? Well, I need to get an antacid. No, it means you don't have enough good acid in here. We don't want to get rid of it. The worst thing you can do is an antacid. But antacids get rid of the symptom. It creates other problems, but it gets rid of the symptom of having heartburn. So when we have this not enough acid, or we're using antacids, it breaks up the good bacteria that's in our digestive tract. And it also makes us more susceptible to dangerous infections like salmonella or Clostridium difficile or even pneumonia. And one of the other things that can happen is there's a little bug in here called H. pylori. And H. pylori, if there isn't enough acid, will start to eat holes in that mucus layer in the stomach, and it'll actually cause ulcers. So that's how we get those ulcers, from not enough of the good stomach acid. Now, a lot of times the antacids that we have are like Mylanta and Maalox and those things. They contain aluminum, and aluminum is really bad because it can settle in the prostate in males and create problems there. It can go into the brain, excess aluminum, and it's linked to Alzheimer's. By taking this all the time, we get excess aluminum in the system. The other thing they like to use is Tums and Rolaids. They use calcium carbonate, which is a type of limestone, and that ends up creating other problems such as constipation. The other thing we use is magnesium, milk of magnesia. Some of these things, they're laxatives. When they're used a lot, they can create diarrhea. So when we look at these types of things here, especially the calcium products, they can cause things like kidney stones, and even these aluminum products can cause osteoporosis, which is softening of the bones, weakening of the bones, all because of the overuse of that. By the way, on the label, antacid says never use more than 2 weeks at one time. And I've had a number of people come in that have been using it over 10 years. It's totally destroyed their digestive system. So now, if we've chewed our food good, broke down the starches, broke down the proteins in the stomach with good hydrochloric acid and pepsin, it's time to go into the small intestine, which is about 20 feet long. Now, the small intestine breaks down the food from the stomach, and it also absorbs about 90% of your nutrients from your food. So that's the job, is break down the food and absorb it. It breaks it down into microscopic particles so that it can travel through little tiny hairs in the walls of the intestine, cross across into the bloodstream, and that way it gets carried to all 40 trillion cells. So that's how we nourish our body, from our toes to the top of our head, through breaking down the food, absorbing it, and having it go through our bloodstream. But guess what? We need a little bit of help to break it down small enough so it can go across those little hairs and actually make it into the bloodstream and into our cells. So when we have fat that's in the stomach, a message comes over to the liver and says, hey, in about an hour, I'm going to send you some fat into that small intestine. So you get ready. So the liver does two things. It's getting the poisons and toxins out of our body and putting them into the gallbladder. And then it's also making a thing called bile. And bile is a green substance that emulsifies fat. It's kind of like dishwashing detergent that we would get the fat off of our dishes. So when the food comes in here, particularly fat comes into the small intestine, the muscles squeeze like a turkey baster this bile, and it comes out through the bile duct down into the small intestine, and it emulsifies the fat. Now, why is that important? Because when we break down that fat, we break down vitamin A, vitamin D, vitamin E, vitamin F, vitamin K, 1 and 2. So that's for things like your eyes and your vision, your immune system, your heart, your arteries to keep from plaque building up, and even keeping your blood thin. So it's absolutely necessary for us to break down these fat-soluble vitamins. And then it also releases toxic chemicals out of our body. Now, a lot of times when this gets so blocked up in here from so many poisons and toxins, the gallbladder will start to become sick. It'll develop gallstones and cholesterol stones, which can block the duct here. So every time you eat fat, you can get a gallstone attack. So normally what happens, if they let it go too long, they'll go in and cut this gallbladder out. Now you do have another way to get bile in, which is this other approach here. Unfortunately, folks, what happens here, watch this, is it drips like a leaky faucet. Drip, drip, drip. And so we don't get enough of that bile in there to break our food down and our fat-soluble vitamins, so we end up becoming deficient. The good news is we now use what we call bile salts. And bile salts are something we can take with our meal that take the place of the gallbladder. And it will make bile and be able to break this down for you so that you can get those fat-soluble vitamins. So this here, we talked about toxins, and I'm going to be doing another webinar on toxins, which is one of the most important things you're going to want to learn about because it's creating all kinds of diseases. We have over 82,000 toxic chemicals in our food, our air, our water, our makeup, our homes, and our environment now. It is increased dramatically since World War II, and it's in everything. Even when we breathe, we're getting it. Eventually, these toxic chemicals get stored in our cells, and they end up finally creating disease. So we've got another player here also. So now we still got to break down our food more, and the other one is our pancreas. So our pancreas has a tube that's hooked up here also. And the thing that happens is when there's enough hydrochloric acid in the stomach, it sends a message down to the pancreas, just like it did to the liver, and says, hey, I'm going to send some food down there. And the pancreas makes what we call bicarbonate. Bicarbonate is just kind of like baking soda. So when the food comes in here, it's very acidic. The stomach has a pH of about 3. So when it comes in here, the bicarbonate is put in there and it goes up to 7.8. And that allows you to break your food down even further into microscopic particles. If we don't have enough hydrochloric acid, it will not signal the pancreas. We won't make the bicarbonate and it won't break the food down once again. And we're going to end up having digestive problems, undigested pieces of food. Now with the pancreas, 90% of what it does is it has digestive enzymes. So digestive enzymes break your food down to smaller particles, and they break down things like protease breaks down protein, amylase breaks down starches, and lipase, lip means fat, and then we also have some that will break down fiber. So the pancreas is extremely important to break the rest of the food down into these small particles so we can absorb them and digest them. So the pancreas, 90% is digestive, 10% is insulin. That's why when people get pancreatic cancer, you have a 2% chance of living. Because if you don't digest your food, folks, you're not going to live very long. Very important. So now one other thing I wanted to go over was this other player. And these may be one of the most important things that are going on and one of the biggest things that are getting destroyed. That is your microbes or your good gut bacteria. So there's 4 major things that these gut bacteria do inside of our intestinal tract. First, they go in and break our food down, help digest it further. Second of all, they make our B vitamins. Our B vitamins are for stress. They're for energy. They're for our skin, our nails. They're in everything in our body. And we need to, they're water soluble, and they need to be made by these microbes from our food. The third thing is 70%, get this, 70% of your immune system are these good microbes. If you don't have enough of those, you're going to have a weakened immune system, and I can promise you, you are going to be susceptible to all kinds of sickness and disease. The key to live to be 100, have a strong immune system, and this is 70% right here. The last thing they do is something pretty interesting. They make neurotransmitters. So these are chemicals that are made in our gut by these bugs from our food, transfer into the bloodstream and go up to our brain. 90% of serotonin, which is our happy hormone and reduces our risk of having anxiety every day, are made by these bugs in the gut, shipped to the brain. Dopamine, which is huge for depression and things like Parkinson's disease, are all related into the gut by these bugs making them. GABA, which calms down the brain and settles it down so you're not going all the time and can't relax. They affect your sleep. They affect Alzheimer's. So all of these neurotransmitters, which are very important to make us feel good and happy, are made in the gut. When they're damaged, which we're going to talk about, that's why so many people are on antidepressant drugs. They're not being made in the gut and shipped to the brain, and that's the cause of the problem. We're using a lot of antidepressants, but that's not fixing the cause of the problem. Now, one other thing I want you to know, there's 10 times more bacteria in our gut than there is in our cells, than we have cells in our body. Okay, so we've got something like, 40 trillion cells. We've got 400 trillion of these bacteria. So we should have 85% good bacteria and 15% bad. Even the bad bacteria, though, have a purpose for us. They're kind of like wood ticks or mosquitoes in Minnesota. They do have a benefit for us. All right, so now let's talk about this leaky gut, we call it. So first of all, this is normal. Normally when food breaks down, it should come in through these little villi or hairs. It should get sucked up and go through there and into the bloodstream and carried to all of our cells. Absolutely wonderful. Now, what can happen though is we can get what we call intestinal permeability, or holes in these junctions. Instead of being held together tight, they can start breaking apart. And finally what happens is they get large enough so undigested food like protein or or glutens can get through, and when they get in, they'll get into the bloodstream, and they'll cause an inflammation and an immune reaction. The body will attack them. Also, all kinds of bugs can get out, so we can get yeast and fungus. That's why people get fungus on their toes. They can get yeast that goes in and goes to the brain and get brain fog. They can get excess toxic chemicals to go in and make us tired and fatigued. So all these things can escape the intestinal tract and get into the bloodstream, and that's going to cause World War III. Because now the body's going to react to it. So I want you to think of it like a softball fence, this junction. If I throw a softball up against it, it won't go through. But if I throw a golf ball, it goes right through. It's very porous. If I stretch that screen, though, and chain link fence, I stretch it, I can get the softball to go through. And that's basically what we're talking about when these things here go in and get into the bloodstream. So what happens then? It's called leaky gut. It's leaking things into the bloodstream. Leaky gut causes frequent colds, food sensitivities, because now the very food that we're eating looks like the enemy, and the body attacks it. Fatigue, we get autoimmune conditions. There's over 100 of them now. But rheumatoid arthritis, fibromyalgia, multiple sclerosis, Hashimoto's, hypothyroid, Graves' disease are just a few. We get headaches, depression, anxiety, and listen to this, ADD and ADHD. How many kids do you know are going to have something like that? Coming from leaky gut. Skin problems like severe acne, eczema, rosacea, psoriasis. That poison's coming out through the skin. And gut issues like irritable bowel syndrome, constipation, diarrhea, Crohn's, and even celiac sprue. So here's a gal comes in, she's got leaky gut symptoms, and she's complaining of severe psoriasis on her skin and weight gain. So we evaluated her, checked her over, did a very thorough history. We put her on our leaky gut protocol. And after about 3 months, her digestion was just about perfectly normal. Her skin had cleared 90%, the psoriasis, and she lost 20 pounds. So she was ready to give up. She had tried so many things and thought, well, I can't get better. Never, ever give up. In almost all cases, there is a way to start getting the body healthier. So let's go into the colon now. The colon is the sewer system, and that's the last area. It's about 5 feet long, 4 to 5 feet long, and it gets rid of the waste and leftover bacteria after the nutrients are removed in this small intestine. We have what we call peristalsis, which means that it's going to take a liquid and it's going to start to pull out the water and the salts out of the colon, back in and reabsorb them so we don't get dehydrated. And then what it's going to do is it's going to turn it from a liquid back into a solid. It's going to push it along. It's going to collect right here in the sigmoid colon and get ready to have a bowel movement about once to twice a day. One thing I want you to see here is the appendix. Now, most people think the appendix doesn't have any use. Well, it's very important for our immune system. And they found that when you remove the appendix, tonsils, and adenoids, all three together, you have a 5 times greater chance of getting cancer in your lifetime. So yes, those organs are important. Now, the other thing I want to talk about is the color and consistency of the stool. So we got to talk about poop now. Very important. So first of all, it should be normal is brown. Brown is normal, and it should be the consistency of ice cream coming out at the Dairy Queen. So it shouldn't be hard lumps. It shouldn't be shaped like sausage. It shouldn't be shaped like a snake or little blobs, or it shouldn't be even diarrhea. That's not normal. So when we see red in the stool, that usually means lower GI bleeding, right around the lower end of the colon, which could be hemorrhoids, or it could be polyps, or it could be even colon cancer. And also it could be from eating beets. If we get black, that's usually upper GI. That could be ulcers and things like that, or excess iron. So if you see a black stool, pay attention. You might have an ulcer going on. If you get green, that's usually undigested bile. It's not breaking down fats in the gallbladder very well. It could also be from antibiotics. Yellow is gallbladder. It could be also from Giardia, which is a parasite that can get stuck up in the tubes of the gallbladder. And finally, white, which is really nasty. That's a liver disease or pancreatitis or some kind of pancreatic cancers. It can also be caused from antacids, like we talked about earlier. So let's talk a little bit about how do we tell how long it takes for things to go through our intestinal tract. Normally, everything should be moved through in 18 to 24 hours, okay? So say, for example, what we could do is take 1/4 of a cup of corn, and we could take some scrambled eggs, eat that, and wait and see how long it takes for the corn to pass. Another thing you could use is beets. Beets are bright red, so that will tell you, or some kind of charcoal is another thing if you don't like eggs or beets. If it's under 12 hours, say it goes through under 12 hours, it means you're not digesting and absorbing your food. You've probably got some food sensitivities and leaky gut, and you've got an overgrowth of bad bacteria. If it's over 24 hours, we got some problems also, because now it's not moving through and you're probably constipated and you're absorbing a lot of poisons back in your system. So remember, you have to fix this, you got to follow the rules of the stomach. Chew your food 20 times. Don't drink more than 4 ounces with your meals to not get rid of the acid in your stomach. We recommend drinking about half your body weight in ounces in between meals. And we recommend increasing some fiber and adding some magnesium or vitamin C up to bowel tolerance, so it pushes things through and we can do it naturally. So this is what the colon looks like when it gets blocked off. And blocked off here, this is the most common area for colon cancer and diseases to develop, right in here. And those poisons will stay in the system. When they do that, if they can't get out through the colon, they got to go out somewhere else. So what do? They go out through the kidneys, the skin, and out through your lungs through the breath. So these people are going to have what? They're going to have bad breath. They're going to have body odor. They're going to have smelly feet when they take their shoes off. They're going to have foul smelling stools. And it leads to a variety of symptoms like headaches. They get chronic headaches. They get muscle aches, fatigue, autoimmune conditions like lupus, rheumatoid arthritis. They can get cancer and cardiovascular disease. And at least that's what Dr. William Cowden said. He's an MD internist and a cardiologist in medicine. So let's talk about a little bit why the gut gets all out of balance. So first of all, it's fake food. We call them frankenfoods. It says a majority of these fast foods have all kinds of ingredients in that we can't even pronounce. They're all fake foods. The FDA has approved over 3,000 different food additives, preservatives, and colors without adequate research on their safety. 3,000 of them, and the average person ingests 150 pounds of additives a year. Imagine that, 150 pounds of additives a year. This is only one factor of this leaky gut epidemic, but it's a big one. So if you can't read the label and you don't understand what's on there, the rule is don't put it in your body. Eat organic foods. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the SAD diet, or standard American diet, which is the leading cause of chronic health issues we see today. All these chronic things are coming from the diet. According to a 2009 study conducted by the USGA, or DA, 63% of the calories we consume are from processed foods containing preservatives, refined grains, added sugars, and oils. 63% is garbage food, junk food. What is the number one food sensitivity? It's dairy by far. We do a simple finger stick and we send it out to the lab with the blood, and what they find is we test 96 different foods. Number one is almost always dairy. So why is that? Because the food that the cows are fed are called GMO, genetically modified crops, corn and feed and silage. They put antibiotics in these feeds. So when the cows eat them, we get antibiotics which kill our good bacteria in our gut. They put growth hormone in it. That causes the cows to get fatter quicker. It increases estrogen though. So that now we see young girls who are developing at 10 years old and having menstrual cycles and shouldn't be having that. We see men that are getting breast cancer from this, and people that are gaining weight incredibly because of increased estrogen. They spray a thing called Roundup or glyphosate on there, which causes leaky gut and cancer. It's a really toxic chemical. They homogenize and pasteurize the milk, and then finally they take the fat out. Now listen to this. When you take the fat out, you're going to end up with having much higher amounts of sugar, and that can lead to other types of things if you're a diabetic. If you're a diabetic, you want to have full fat milk. You do not want to have 1%. You don't want to have skim milk. It's taken all the fat that counterbalances the sugar out. So you've been told a story about that one. Gluten's is a number two food sensitivity because they've genetically modified 90% of the grains in our food. Now that has now become a problem that creates leaky gut. So glutens are a mixture of proteins in the grains like wheat, barley, and rye. They're in a lot of our packaged foods and prepared dishes. The more gluten, the more gut problems we've been having. And it affects the brain, by the way. It gives a lot of people brain fog. So gluten not only goes in and damages those junctions I talked about, but it alters the good bacteria because there's so much sugar in it. It ends up creating more and more growth of the yeast, funguses, and other things like that. So leaky gut develops Crohn's disease, IBS, SIBO, which is small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. And this gluten also makes a thing called zonulin. And zonulin breaks up that chain link fence very rapidly, opens holes up, creates leaky gut. So pesticides are another thing that damages the gut lining and kills off the good bacteria. Right now, we spray 3 million tons. I'm talking about tons, 3 million tons of pesticides worldwide each year, and more than 16,000 chemicals are involved in the production of these pesticides. The worst of the worst is Roundup or glyphosate. It's sprayed on 90% of our grains, causes leaky gut, kills our good bacteria, and we now know it causes cancer. We're spraying that on our foods. Listen to this. New study shows 52% of all men by age 40 have erectile dysfunction and low sperm count related to these toxic chemicals, these pesticides. So it's causing major infertility problems as well in both male and female. The bee population has been dying off. You wonder why? We can't live on this planet without bees. They're dying off 50% a year, spraying all these chemicals in there, just like the eagles did in the 70s with DDT. That's what's happening here. It causes nervous system disorders, immune suppression, reproduction damage, hormone imbalances, thyroid issues, type 2 diabetes, obesity, and asthma. So this is our dirty dozen here of fruits and vegetables, and here's the clean ones. If you would like a copy, once again, getperfecthealth@gmail. Just send it. We'll send you a copy of this. The key is eat organic, and you don't have to worry about that because you can't get these chemicals all the way off your food. All right, one other case here I want to talk about is a middle-aged gal who came in complaining of severe diarrhea 6 times a day. Many foods would trigger diarrhea, gas, and bloating within 10 minutes of eating. As soon as you eat, off to the bathroom. Made it difficult for her to even leave her house. Her focus and memory was affecting her work. She had bad breath, body odor. Her skin was dry and itchy, along with difficulty sleeping, making her very fatigued during the day. And she had had many antibiotic therapies and other medications, which damaged the microbiome. We did what we call an organic acid urine test to check and see exactly what bugs were in there. And the overgrowth, we also found that she had severe overgrowth of not only bacteria, but candida yeast, funguses, and she also had parasites. All right. What we did then is we did a detox with her first. We had to clean things out. We put her on our leaky gut and protocol and parasite cleanse. She reported no more diarrhea, gas, or bloating. She's sleeping 7 to 8 hours a night. Her energy is an 8 out of 10. Her brain fog is lifted and her itchy skin is now normal. She says that she's grateful and very grateful to have her life back. So we've come to the end here, and I want to thank you again for taking your time to come on tonight and hopefully learn some good things about how your digestion works and why we're having some of the problems. As a gift, I'd like to do a very thorough consultation, and then we do a urine test that checks for those bad bacteria, fungus, and yeast. It's at no charge. All you got to do is call the office. We'll be happy to do it and tell them that you wanted the gift from the webinar. It's good for the 5 first callers, so be sure you call in right away tomorrow. And we'd love for you to share this. My goal is to get the message out, teach people more and more about gut health and just health in general, how they can be in charge of their own health in the future. And sharing it with others, I really appreciate it. So we're going to be having a